Return of the Mount Hua Sect, Chapter 130. The Sword of Mount Hua is strong. Huh? Wei Lip-san's eyes widened as if they would pop out. No, what? Obviously, he had seen it with his own two eyes from start to finish. However, his head couldn't properly interpret the situation he had witnessed. Are we winning? No. To be precise, it was overwhelming. Mount Hua's disciples were pushing back the disciples of Wudang, who seemed so terrifying at the start. Wei Lip-san couldn't believe his eyes. Where are the Wudang? They resided at the northern tip of Gangho. There were many sects in this world, but few would hesitate to place Wudang at the peak. If any sect could be compared, then it was only the Hainan sect. However, the disciples of the Wudang sect were currently struggling against the disciples of Mount Hua. This can't be happening. The Huayong sect is a subsect of Mount Hua. Wei Lip-san is a man infinitely proud to be a disciple of Mount Hua. But pride is pride, and reality is reality, right? Just because someone is proud of their father doesn't mean that they fail to recognize that a general or king has a higher status. Goodwill and ability are two separate issues. Wei Lip-san's feelings for Mount Hua were the same. He knew that he was from a fallen sect, but he couldn't sever the affection he held for Mount Hua. Now that fallen sect was protecting him, and it even seemed to be winning. Wei Lip-san grabbed his chest. He felt something throbbing. Father! Yes. Wei So-heng also looked back at Wei Lip-san with trembling eyes. They're strong. What more could be said? There was an endless sense of excitement. Gulp, gulp. Wei Lip-san slowly turned his head. Sitting on the floor with a shaggy head of hair, Chung Myung was drowning himself in a bottle of alcohol that he seemed to mysteriously manifest from who knows where. Feeling Wei Lip-san's gaze fall on him, Chung Myung tilted his head and asked, "Would you like a drink?" Mount Hua has changed. The disciples became stronger than ever, and has some crazy ones too. Back in the day, neither were there. Wei Lip-san had no choice but to wonder which was better, having both or having neither. No. Now isn't the time to think about this. Disciple, your Sayongs and Sasuks are fighting. How are you drinking? Yes, slowly. Right. Then what are you doing? No. Chung Myung smiled as he saw Wei Lip-san grimace in bewilderment. I've already done my part, but if they lose to those kids, we'll have to dip our noses in the water. What? Wei Lip-san asked back with a face that showed he couldn't understand at all. Instead of answering, Chung Myung just smiled and laughed. Then he looked over where the battle was happening. Who taught them? They can't help but turn out strong. After all, Chung Myung had taught them directly. Was it arrogance? Well, others are welcome to think that. Even if you search the world, there would be few that could teach these kids like Chung Myung has. It's something that even Chung Myung himself acknowledges. No one else could ever teach their disciples like Chung Myung. Never. It would be unimaginable to think of the strongest member of a sect kicking and abusing the second and third class disciples and teaching them starting from the basics. No matter where one looked in the world, such a place did not exist. Even if there were people that had the will to do it, if they actually tried, all the elders and the sect leader would come running and cause a fuss until it stopped. Of course, that is only natural. The strength of a sect is determined by how many masters it can produce, but the status of a sect is determined by how highly its strongest master could rank compared to others. Wasn't it clear from the way Mount Hua was always considered beneath Wudang? Yet, they laughed in their faces when the Plum Blossom Sword Saint was around. To create such masters, the top warriors of each faction devoted all their efforts to cultivation, and one person was selected to perfect the sect's martial arts. To prevent the difference in disciples, some immediate disciples were also trained. But Chung Myung is different. He had an understanding of martial arts that went beyond the top leaders of each sect, and furthermore, he had knowledge and experience they lacked. Above all else, it's important for me to be strong, but that isn't all. Hadn't he already felt it? In a life where he alone struggled to be strong, Chung Myung was pained by the results that he failed to reach. The image of his Sahyungs, who died right before his eyes, still haunts his dreams to this day. He never wanted to see something like that happen again. Mount Hua had to become stronger now, so that someday, when Chung Myung fully realizes his martial arts and his Sahyungs become strong enough to support him, they can usher in a new era for Mount Hua, unlike any other before it. Gulp, gulp. Chung Myung, who continued to drink his liquor, wiped his mouth with his sleeve and mumbled. Jogul Sahyung made 3 mistakes. No, 4. He would need to be handled later. Baekchun slowly turned his head and looked at Jogul. He clearly heard Chung Myung mumbling from behind. There was no way that Jogul didn't hear it either. Baekchun could see Jogul's face go pale as he continued to wield his sword. I shouldn't make a mistake. Baekchun turned his gaze towards Jinhyun, who was staring at him with a determined face. Baekchun slowly opened his mouth. What are you doing? What? You don't seem like the sort of person that would just sit and stare. Jinhyun, understanding Baekchun's words, bit his lip and quietly spoke. Help the Sahyungs. Sahyung! What are you doing? Move, right now. Yes! The disciples guarding Jinhyun's back all scattered to support their Sahyungs who were being overwhelmed. Baekchun glanced at Jinhyun and smiled. It's a scene that people will remember. Wudang's disciples desperately tried to collaborate with one another to handle Mount Hua's disciples. Jinhyun couldn't say anything and smacked his lips. Damn it! Even if they won, there would be no pride in it. No, it was shameful instead. If it wasn't for this fight being gravely important, Jinhyun wouldn't have ordered such a thing, even if it meant losing. Isn't this fun? Jinhyun sighed deeply and opened his eyes slightly. Seeing the anger and embarrassment disappearing from his face, Baekchun nodded. That's great. In terms of level-headedness, this man exceeded Baekchun. Baekchun still wasn't an expert in controlling his emotions, but that was all. Then, Jinhyun spoke. Can I ask one thing? Sure. By what means did you become so strong? That isn't the fun question I was hoping for. The reason is rather simple. We trained hard. Are you messing with me? Baekchun shrugged his shoulders. Even though he was telling the truth, no one believed him, so what was the point? Of course, their training was excessive to the point they would vomit, cough blood, and collapse from exhaustion. They were seriously worried they might die. You could never make it through that training. It wasn't something that could be done with willpower alone. It was only possible because there was someone that could push them to the edge and was strong enough to bully them to the point that they felt it was better to die than rebel. When he thought back to his training, a chill ran down Baekchun's body and he began to tremble unconsciously. Whatever. Either way, it's true that you people are strong, but there is one more thing. Jinhyun's face was slightly distorted. It was as if the emotions he tried to hold back were slightly breaking through. Why isn't that guy coming forward? Is he ignoring the Wudang sect, or is he simply trying to safeguard that reputation of his? That one. Baekchun glanced at Chung Myung and smirked. You seem to be mistaken. Mistaken? He won't take the stage for someone at your level. We raise our swords against those that match our skills. Jinhyun's face was distorted. But don't get too angry. It's the same for me. Strange things happen in the world, like a 3-legged hen or snake with 2 tails. Sometimes, a monster with 3 heads and 6 arms come out as well. 3 heads and 6 arms? Don't worry, I'll play with you. Wouldn't it be appropriate for the righteous sword of Hua to deal with the Wudang's indestructible sword. Aren't you his Sasuk? It's impossible to gauge strength simply by rank. At one time, Baekchun was obsessed with such things. But now, Baekchun's goal is just to grow stronger. We should start the fight soon, or that damn bastard will get furious again. But before that, I would like to make a promise. Baekchun looked at Jinhyun and said, if you lose this fight, step away from Nanyang and never touch the Hwa Sect again. That is, if you're someone who knows shame. Jinhyun's face hardened. If we lose, I promise on my honor. Okay then. Shring! Baekchun drew his sword as Jinhyun also slowly pulled out his blade. After a short few words of conversation, there was no longer a need to talk. From now on, their swords would speak for them. Ta! Jinhyun rushed at Baekchun with no hesitation. I must not give him a break. He wasn't going to play around after watching his Sahyong's battles. Mount Hwa's sword was elegant and swift. If he gave them time, he might be attacked and overwhelmed without even having a chance to counter. But despite seeing Jinhyun rush in, Baekchun didn't seem to be the least bit agitated. I'm reminded again. What a monster we've been training with. Your head must be empty. Sasuk lost 12 times today. Do you have a death wish? Are you going to keep doing this again and again until you die? Right. Until the day is done, we'll keep going. Baekchun gnashed his teeth and clenched his sword as he recalled the nightmarish memories that he wished he could forget. He ran toward Jinhyun, who was also rushing at him. Sword Dragon, one of the brightest geniuses in the world. If the Jongnam Conference hadn't happened, then perhaps Jin Geumryung would have been one of the 6 dragons. In other words, Jinhyun and Jin Geumryung were equally talented. Baekchun's eyes turned cold. Jinhyun's sword, deeply coated with a blue sword key, smoothly swam through the air. It was a sight as if blue silk was slicing the sky. What strength! An unwavering sword. It was a sword that truly deserved to be praised. And Baekchun slightly shook his sword. Pop! A red plum blossom bloomed from the tip of his sword. I made it bloom. After driving themselves to the limit, destroying and rebuilding their bodies many times over, the results were shown. Plum blossoms had finally bloomed at the tip of Baekchun's sword. The plum blossom that slowly bloomed quickly multiplied and became dozens and then hundreds. As if a gale had begun to blow, plum blossoms rose into the air as a rain of petals fluttered about. Jinhyun's eyes shook and went wide as saucers. He swung his sword desperately, albeit belatedly. A wave of deep blue sword ki covered his entire body. It was a mighty and unbreakable sword ki, but it was impossible to keep fluttering petals from working their way inside. Shh! The petals dug in between the gaps in Jinhyun's sword ki and sliced aside. At that moment, the blossoms began to fly in unison toward Jinhyun as his sword ki was disturbed. The petals swept across Jinhyun's body. Thud. Baekchun looked at Jinhyun, who had fallen to the floor, and quietly pushed his sword into the sheath. Maybe the name Sword Dragon was given to you a bit too early. A merciless declaration, and after that, a subtle voice followed after. Wow! Look at that cool guy! Don't do that, you damn little bastard.